Welcome, everyone, to episode number 8 of the Bunker Talk. I have my good friend here, Robert Friedman. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? Why do you do it? And how did you end up there?
My name's Robert Friedman. I work for a law firm called Kelley Kronenberg. We are a statewide firm with offices actually in other parts of the country as well. We have over 500 employees at this point, over 200 attorneys. My area of specialty is workers' compensation. So I represent employers, insurance companies, and third-party administrators in workplace accident claims. And I've been doing that for almost 20 years now.
Wow. And how'd you get into workers' comp? Why workers' comp?
Well, the joke always is when I'm hiring new associates, I ask them, why have you chosen workers' compensation? And if you tell me it was your childhood dream to be a workers' comp attorney, I'm not hiring you because I know you're lying to me. It happened sort of by accident many years ago when I was applying for jobs. I saw an ad for an insurance defense position. I didn't know exactly what that entailed, but I knew I needed a job. I had a wife and a baby, and so I applied for the job and found out it was workers' compensation. Didn't know much about workers' compensation at that time, but ended up really enjoying the practice area. It's a very small niche of the overall law in the state of Florida, and it's a tight-knit community. After you do it for a few years, you get to learn all the judges, all the mediators, all the attorneys. You really get to build really strong relationships with these folks. So I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, that's actually true. It's almost the same for insurance agents, right? Like if you dream of being an insurance agent, I don't know. Right. I don't know if I can trust you as a human, right? That's right. We're both in professions that aren't necessarily first choices. I know this in speaking to you, but you said that your father was an attorney. That's right. What type of attorney was he?
He was a civil litigation attorney.
Okay.
And so I grew up at the dinner table listening to all his stories, and that's really what drew me to the profession. Was I saw how much he enjoyed what he was doing. And I'm a competitive person. He's a competitive person. And I thought, it's pretty cool. I can take all that competitiveness and sort of channel it in my profession. So I think I was destined for this profession even as a child.
Right.
But what I've learned actually as I've gotten older, it's not the competitiveness that has kept me in this profession. It's the relationships that I've built with my colleagues, even with the opposing attorneys, and with my clients, most importantly. Those relationships are what kept me in this profession as long as I've been in it.
So it's like it's almost in your blood, right? Like I wasn't born into an insurance family, but my dad opened an insurance agency when I had just graduated high school, and it was out of necessity. He was tired of working for corporate America, and so he was like, "Well, we're just going to do it." And I did not enjoy it initially, but it's funny because a lot of our industry, it's like that, right? People just fall into insurance. It's a family business. They stay in it, they inherit it, or someone just needed a job. And most of the entry level is like a receptionist. People just start as a receptionist and then end up, and then you just get sucked in. You can't leave.
Well, and the reality is that you and I are both in industries that people need as business owners, whether it's insurance or legal support. We are here to be able to help people with very complicated and difficult issues, and being able to help them navigate that is very rewarding. And I'm sure you find the same thing.
Yep, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about Kelley Kronenberg.
So Kelley Kronenberg was founded back in 1980 as a small, almost primarily workers' comp defense firm. And they have grown dramatically over the last 43 years. And now we cover a variety of practice areas from workers' compensation, bankruptcy, foreclosure, family law, first and third party property defense. I could go on for a while. Generally, what you would want to know about Kelley Kronenberg is if you are a business and you have some legal need, it's more likely than not that Kelley Kronenberg has an attorney at the firm that would be able to provide you some sort of legal guidance. I have been with the firm for 15 years, primarily because of how innovative they have been. The legal profession in general has changed over the years. Workers' compensation has changed over the years. The law is constantly changing. And in order to be a successful law firm, you need to be able to adapt to those changes. You need to have some foresight. You need to be able to see those changes before they even occur. And when I joined the firm 15 years ago, the managing partners of our firm understood that things were not always going to be the same, and you had to be able to pivot and you had to be able to make those adjustments. And we went from a small, primarily exclusive workers' compensation firm of probably less than 30 employees to what we are now, which is over 500 employees in states like Illinois and Texas and Georgia. And what I have gotten most out of my experience at the firm is that firm allows me to maximize the relationships with my clients, because while I only do workers' compensation, the businesses that I represent have lots of other legal issues that are outside my area of specialty. And I'm often able to connect them with attorneys within my firm that can provide them the legal services they need. And it makes businesses feel a little bit more comfortable when those legal services are all under one roof, rather than having to go to a bunch of different law firms depending on what their legal needs are.
Well, and you become a resource for your clients, right? Like, you become the guy that they think of when they need everything, which is always an advantage. You're always at the top of mind.
Absolutely. And, just recently, we had a family friend who was involved in a startup technology company. And he approached me about, and they're up in the Northeast, and he approached me about some legal needs that they had. And as I started talking to him, I realized, well, his legal needs went far beyond that. As a startup company, there are so many legal issues that you're not even thinking about that could arise.
Especially in that industry.
For sure. And I had an opportunity to sit down and talk with him, talk to him a little bit about the different practice areas within my firm. And over the last couple of months, we have really been able to connect him to a lot of different attorneys with decades of experience who are, as we speak, actively helping him to understand and navigate, and most importantly, avoid a lot of the pitfalls that these startup companies have. A lot of these startup companies just end up failing because they don't have the resources available to them to avoid those landmines that they may face. And, I'm very proud of the fact that our firm has really been able to help them in that capacity.
Well, it's impactful work that you do when you know. Unfortunately, it's similar with what we do. A lot of people start a business thinking that they can just start a business and they don't need certain protections or certain guidance in place. And when they find out, it's too late, right? It's after a catastrophe. So a business owner that is smart enough to understand that prevention and acting first and thinking, mapping everything out is best, maybe more costly, right? But it's always better to do it that way versus having to react to things that pop up. And there's still, even if with all the planning, there's still stuff that pops up, right? Like, you can't plan for everything. You can't buy insurance for everything, right? You wouldn't be able to operate. But if you know it, and you try to prepare as best as possible, which is where having good legal representation comes into play, having good insurance comes into play, it definitely helps.
Yeah, and we spoke about this recently. My primary job on a day-to-day basis is handling the legal work of my clients, but I view my job as something much bigger than that. The prevention part that you just mentioned is really important to me. I do a lot of continuing education courses for my clients. I speak with employers directly. I go into their places of business and learn about their operations and procedures. And I talk to them specifically about this idea of prevention. Don't worry about coming to me after the accident happened. Right. We can have that conversation then. Let's talk about how we can prevent that accident from happening. Let's talk about the communication that you should be having with your employees about workplace accidents, protecting themselves from those workplace accidents, and then what you should do when those workplace accidents occur. How can you best serve your employee when that happens, and how can you keep your costs as a business down when that happens? But that is prevention. That's being proactive. That is not waiting until this happens, contacting your insurance company and feeling like you're lost.
Right.
Having a relationship with an attorney, it's funny. People think that, having a relationship with an attorney is some sort of automatic financial investment.
Right.
And what I say is no. Yes, at some point, you might need to have a financial investment in an attorney because you're involved in some type of litigation. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can have a relationship with an attorney who is helping you avoid that financial investment. And that's what I have been talking to my clients about for many years is, let me help you. You're not paying me to do this. I'm coming in to help you so you don't need me at some point down the road. And if you do, we're going to be able to help you keep your costs down.
Well, even that philosophy of helping first is kind of how we are at the bunker, because the day that it does happen, they already know you care because you gave so much of your knowledge, your time, your effort, because your goal is protection and employee safety. That matters. So when the time does come, it's inevitable, especially you have 50 employees one year and then you have 150, it's harder to keep employees safe, right? If you're not extra proactive, if you don't have someone monitoring that constantly, those things with scale, it's more bound to happen. But ultimately, as a business professional, you know that giving value first always wins.
Well, and I've believed this very strongly for many years now. You have to invest in the relationship.
Right.
And that investment up front, where it's not about, billable hours, it's not about how much time you've spent on a claim after an accident happened. It is about investing in that relationship and building that trust up front. So when the accident occurs, there is that level of trust and confidence. Okay, this attorney is going to help me now and is going to do right by me. But that doesn't just happen by me walking into a room and giving you a wink and saying, hey, you can trust me.
Right.
There has to be that time that you invest in that relationship up front.
And so it's similar also in our industry as far as there's price shoppers, right? People that only care about saving $500, right? I was working on a proposal today for a special event. A nonprofit is hosting a soccer tournament, right? Yeah, I got them a quote that was $350 for the day. No big deal. But when I read it, it's a soccer tournament and the exclusions are showing exclusions of sporting events. And it's just like, if I wouldn't have taken 3 extra minutes to just go through that proposal and check that, and I would have sold them that policy, that paper would have been worth nothing, right? So I don't think that the consumer understands that it's more than just a price. Just like the consumer, doesn't understand that, yes, you guys, attorney's fees are attorney's fees no matter where you go. But the reality of it is that it matters. It matters who represents you. It matters who insures you. It matters that, you don't always want the one with the wink and you could trust me,
For sure. And you talk about the consumer, and in this day and age with so much information readily available on the internet, everybody thinks they're a doctor because they can go to WebMD, and everybody thinks they can be a lawyer because they go to LegalZoom. Right. Everybody thinks that they can be an insurance. The reality is, yes, that information is out there, and you can learn some of the building blocks or fundamentals, but there is no substitute for an experienced practitioner. Somebody who is dealing with those issues day in and day out, who can look at an insurance policy or can look at a contract and be able to really understand what is being stated in that document. You can't get that from just going to a website. No. You need an experienced person who has been through the war before, who knows how to guide you in those situations. So yes, I totally understand what you're saying with that.
It's funny how similar our professions are, with value, right? We're not necessarily the most loved in the public as attorneys and insurance professionals, but really what we do is very important work. And working with people like yourself, myself, at the time of need, it really can boil down to, can you reopen your doors tomorrow or not?
For sure. And with small and medium-sized businesses, insurance claims, workers' comp claims, they could really have a significant impact. If their mods go up significantly, their insurance rate, they might end up having to close their business. Yeah. So for those businesses in particular, it's really important that they understand what they can do, getting the right guidance on the insurance side, getting the right guidance on the legal side. It could make the difference between having open doors and closed doors. Or
closed doors, which is really, really powerful. And that's kind of what keeps me going, right? I take pride in being able to guide people that maybe wouldn't know any better, or don't, a lot of people that open businesses do it because they have a passion for the business of whatever it is that they're doing, right? The person that opens a restaurant is because they love to cook or they're a great chef. It's not because they're, a great business person. Right? So they don't know where to get these things. And that's why it's so important to create relationships like this, where I have, a team of professionals that I know I could bring in and we have aligned values in what we're doing. Along this line, though, tell me, give me some 2-3 tips on businesses. Like, what can business owners do to keep their employees safe? What are some things that are low-hanging fruit that every business should be doing?
So a few of the things I'm going to say are going to sound obvious, but the more I speak with businesses, I realize maybe these things aren't so obvious. The first thing is care about your employee. If you build a strong relationship with your employee, if they do get injured at some point in the future, they're going to try to do right by you as a business. Right. If they feel like it is an adversarial relationship, if they feel like they've been aggrieved or they weren't treated well over the years as an employee, they're not going to do anything to help you in that workers' compensation claim. So the first thing I would recommend is treat your employees well. If for no other reason, to protect yourself if something happens. But just on a basic human level, that's what we should be doing, right? We should be treating our employees well. Communication. And we had a long conversation yesterday about the importance of really good communication. And I actually just gave a talk for my daughter's student government about communication and why it's so important. And there's so many ways to communicate with people nowadays, right? I can send you a text message. I could send you a message on social media. I can call you. I could FaceTime you. Figuring out how to best communicate with your employees. Not all your employees are going to want to communicate with you in the same way. Some employees need that face-to-face conversation. Some employees you may be able to communicate just as effectively through text message. Figure out how to best communicate with your employees and do that all the way through during the entirety of their employment. That communication will also build up that trust, will also build up the foundation of what will happen in the future if something happens in the workplace. So those relationships, the communication, I think are of the utmost important. But information and education are also really important. I find very often, as you have pointed out, especially smaller businesses, these are the owners of these businesses have the passion. Let's just say the pizza shop. They want to have the best pizza shop in town. They're not really thinking about the business side of this. They're not thinking about insurances. They're not thinking about potential legal issues. They just want to make the best sauce and the best cheese to cater to the community. But they need to be educated on the business side of what they're doing. They need insurance people to educate them. They need attorneys to educate them. They need this information if they want to keep their businesses open in the long term, because the best tasting pizza in town will only take you so far if you haven't handled those insurance and legal issues. So what I would encourage these business owners to do is don't just be the pizza guy, be the business guy. Understand what it takes to maintain that business and use the resources that you have in your community to learn about that. You and I met through the Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce maybe isn't for every business, but you and I have seen the value that comes from being in a chamber because you meet other professionals from a wide variety of life at these chamber events. And so if you're a business owner, you might meet an insurance person who could help you. You might meet an attorney who can help you. You might meet all different types of specialists who could add value to what you're doing as a business. So don't just go into work every day, put your head down and make your pizzas or sell your coffee. Think about how you're going to sustain this business. And I think that, in addition to maintaining very strong relationships with your employees, is fundamental to being able to build yourself up as a strong business.
It's funny because, even in our world of insurance, we've had, we go to these conferences and you always hear these horror stories about claims and things like that. And I've heard of the claim where, it's a huge corporation, thousands of employees, and there was an employee that got severely injured, like in the hospital. And the CEO of the business showed up at the hospital. It wasn't a text message. It wasn't a phone call. He didn't matter. Titles didn't matter. He cared about the well-being of his employee, and he showed up at the hospital. The family did not litigate, right? Because they were the natural, which it's crazy that you have to talk about that, right? Like it's crazy that you have to actually even highlight that because they were just humans that cared about their employees, right? So sometimes we overcomplicate these things as business owners, as employees, but really it can boil down to just treating your employees like humans, caring about them, Obviously, there's tactical things that you need to do to provide a safe work environment, depending on your industry. Like that, you can't just care for them and not give them the equipment that they need, right? Like that's half of the battle. But that's interesting though, and I think a lot of, especially in these days, right, post-COVID world, there's shortages of employees. It's a tight line for employers that, especially in industries where, restaurants, contractors, those types of things where it's hard to find employees. It's hard to find, everyone's overworked. So it's hard to balance the human aspect of caring plus needing to open your business and get your jobs done, fulfill, POs, all that stuff. It's very intertwined. And now more than ever, I feel like it's a more complicated time to be an employer.
For sure. And some of my larger clients are in the retail industry, and the retail industry got hit terribly by COVID. But the retail industry in general is being impacted by economic forces and technological changes, with people being able to get goods and services online now, not having to go into brick and mortar shops. That puts a lot of stress on the retail industry. And that in turn trickles down to putting a lot of stress on the employees, these associates that are working at the retail industries. They don't feel, and I can tell you this because I'm taking their depositions every day, they don't feel like they're being valued the way they should be valued in those industries. And I think that these employers are aware of it, but they're facing that conflict. They have all these competing forces pulling at them, but at the end of the day, your business is only as strong as the employees that you have working for you. And if you can't keep them safe, and if you can't take care of them after they get hurt, then your business is going to suffer from that. And that's the conversation that I'm having with these businesses all the time is, look, if one of your employees gets hurt, I'm going to protect your interests as a business.
Right.
But let's talk about how you can also protect your employees to avoid those situations from occurring.
And obviously you would know more than I do, even though I'm mildly aware of it, but without the good work culture, without that good environment where your employees know that you care, you treat them well, you pay them fairly, all of that stuff, right? I'm assuming that at the time of a claim, that's almost like if the employee does not have that work environment, right? I'm assuming that that's where some of these employees are like, well, now I get to stick it to them.
Right. Their instinct is, I'm going to go get a lawyer real quick.
Yep.
And I'm going to file my claim real quick. And I think the big problem, at least on the workers' comp side, is that many of these injured workers don't understand what they're legally entitled to. You drive down I-95 and you see the billboards with the happy people that say, I just won $6 million. And as you're driving down the street and you were just involved in a work accident, you're thinking, that's going to be me. I'm going to win $6 million. And their expectations are completely out of proportion with the reality. I think employers also can do a better job of speaking to their employees about expectations, what you are entitled to in a workers' compensation claim.
I think a lot of employers don't talk about it, almost like they know we have it because we have to, but I don't want to educate them on the system.
Right.
I feel like that's a position that a lot of them take.
For sure. And, you're required by law to have these workers' comp
posters
right up in and so they feel like they have done their job. They have satisfied their legal requirements. But the average employee doesn't understand what you're entitled to under workers' compensation benefits. And without getting too much into the weeds about the law, in civil litigation, you're entitled to pain and suffering. In workers' compensation, the only benefits you're entitled to are lost wage benefits and medical benefits. So once you have gone through all the medical care you can get, and once you are gone through all the lost wage benefits, you're back to work full time, there's no more money in workers' comp. And even though your lifestyle has changed a little bit, even though you still have some residual pain, you don't get paid in workers' compensation for that. And for the average worker, that's very hard for them to understand because they think, well, you say my claim is over, but I'm still in pain.
Right.
And explaining to them, unfortunately, in this system, which is a no-fault system, meaning that if you get hurt at work doing something that's integral to your job, but it's not your employer's fault, your employer is still responsible for it. And the trade-off is because it's a no-fault system, you get only limited benefits. You don't get the full realm of benefits that you would get in a civil litigation case. And I think if the employees understood that from the outset, if their expectations were set from the outset, where the employer says, okay, you've had a work accident, we're sorry, we'll get you to a clinic, we'll have you looked at, but please understand that the benefits that you're entitled to are medical benefits and benefits if you miss some time from work. Mm-hmm. This is not the case.
You're not getting the billboard check.
Right. You probably are not getting the billboard check, so we just want you to understand that. Having that conversation with the employees and setting the expectation early could make a big difference.
Well, assuming a business owner knows that. And that's why what you do is so important.
Well, and that's, you bring up an excellent point, which is very often when I speak to smaller or medium-sized businesses and I ask them, have you ever been involved in a workers' comp claim before? The answer is no. Mm-hmm. And I ask them what they know about workers' comp, and they say, other than the poster up in the break room, I don't really know too much about it.
And that it's based off my payroll. Right. They know that. Yeah.
And so I have to educate them first before they can start educating their employees.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's really good information because, again, these are things that business owners that just get into the business because they love what they do would never know. And that's something that the internet doesn't teach you either. Right.
And it's actually, as I was saying, it's the part of my job that I enjoy the most, is that interaction with the businesses, the building of relationship, and helping them navigate those difficult times.
You're a trusted advisor.
Exactly. Somebody once told me that another name for an attorney is a counselor. Do you know why they call them counselors? Because they counsel. Mm-hmm. And so much of what I do is counseling and advising, not litigating. I'm not in court all the time. I am trying to educate first. And I feel like that's really where the value is.
No, I agree. And I think that even though, like, for example, probably more in my space than in yours, the internet is coming for us, right? And the InsurTechs and all those things. But in reality, if you position yourself, there's a saying in our industry, right, where price only matters in absence of value. Mm-hmm. If I am giving you value and I am actually fulfilling a need that you either knew you had and couldn't afford, right, or didn't know you had, and I'm really, really helping you run your business in a way that is better than it was before. Right. I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about $50,000 of a difference, right? Especially down here in South Florida, price is, first of all, insane right now with our property insurance, with all of our insurances. Thankfully, not workers' comp. Right. But, ultimately, price is only a factor when there's no value. And so, you providing the value up front, education, care, and then being there at the worst possible time, right, where they don't remember what you told them to do, right, because they're so scared and so nervous, it's valuable and it matters.
And you and I have had this conversation. There's a lot of people out there that do what we do. Mm-hmm. We're not in some unique niche where we're the only ones. And so that value is so important. We were talking the other day about how we need to separate ourselves from the other people that do what we do, because it's not about separating based on price.
No.
It's about separating based on value. What is the value of the relationship? What is the value of the information that you're getting? Is it really going to impact how you as a business move forward? Mm-hmm. And that value only comes from this,
right,
one-on-one interaction, me giving you the opportunity to ask questions, me giving you the opportunity to learn what the law says. It's that type of interaction that has the real value.
Yep, I agree. Tell me, obviously you've been doing this for so long. Give me some of, I guess, obviously I'm not asking for client information, but give me, like, you've talked and interacted with so many businesses, right? And so many business owners. Give me an example of someone that did it right. Like, just that understood your message, your value, a business owner that really, maybe even just like post-claim, right? Like what is it that a business owner should do post-claim, or one that has done it well?
I can tell you I have a claim right now where there is a question as to whether there was actually even a workplace accident. The injured worker is claiming that he did injure himself. I spoke to the owner of the business. They said, no, this person had this problem for many, many years. He told us about this problem for many, many years. We don't think this happened at work. And during that initial conversation with the employer, I always contact the employer immediately after I get a claim. I want to hear directly from the employer what happened. I want them to tell me about things that are not going to appear in the claim file that I get. What kind of employee was this? Did they show up on time? Did they get along well with others? Were they a valued employee to you? Were there any issues that may motivate them to pursue a claim that might not be legitimate? Really get a feel for that. But then I'm asking them about what documents they have. Do you have a personnel file? Do you have payroll records? Do you have, you told me that you've disciplined this person 5 times. Do you have disciplinary reports, or was it all verbal?
Right.
Because a lot of the times the employers will say, oh, I've had many, many, many problems with this employee, but we never put it in writing.
It's not documented.
So, and it's become cliche, and the people I work with laugh when I always say document, 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 because that helps so much as we begin our investigation of a claim once a claim is initiated. But this employer that I spoke to on the phone was so incredibly helpful. He had all the disciplinary reports. He had a very well-organized personnel file. He had very easy-to-read payroll records. And he was able to email me all of those during my conference with him. And so I had access to all that information up front. And I've constantly been in communication. As I've learned more information through the investigation, he has been accessible. So I have his cell phone number. So I call him up and I say, I just learned this today. Can we talk about this? And we will have a conversation. That accessibility to the employer and helping me in understanding the information that I'm obtaining during my investigation is invaluable. And then he's gone even to the next level. I recently took the deposition of the injured worker, and I sent him a copy of the transcript for him to read the transcript and him to see what this injured worker said. And we're now going to meet again, and we're going to talk about that testimony. That level of involvement is so crucial, especially in a claim that we're questioning whether that accident really occurred. And the employer has really all the information that can help me in making the determination as to the strength of our claim. That level of cooperation is so important. And he has never made me feel like I am infringing on his time or that this is some hassle. And he has a business to run.
Right.
This is not his full-time job, is to help me in handling this claim. But he also understands that I can't do my job effectively unless that cooperation exists. And so to answer your question, it's that level of cooperation, especially on controverted claims, that could be the difference between prevailing and or not.
And, I'm so happy you gave me this example, because even something like that, right? The pizza shop, let's go back to the local community pizza shop. How many hours is he working making pizza? How organized do you think their payroll is?
I can tell you, I years and years ago, I went to a small restaurant client, and I asked to see the payroll records, and he took me to a closet where there were stacks of shoe boxes. And in the shoe boxes were calculator ribbons, and it was just numbers on it. And he said, this is the payroll. And this business had been around for a long time.
That makes me so sad, because, he's just so passionate about his business, but doesn't know any better.
Right.
And
this was the first time in 20 years he had ever had a workers' comp claim. And it was a story that I have heard so many times. Oh, this guy was like a son to me. Yep. I would loan him money. I mean, he never thought that this employee would ever turn around and do that. And he had nothing to protect himself and to really help me help him doing that. And so I contrast that to the employer that I'm working with now. He has put me in a much better position to be successful.
To help him.
Right. Because of how organized and how cooperative he has been. And that applies to the insurance companies that I represent as well. I am as successful as the cooperation that I get from my clients. And you can talk to any attorney. That's what they're going to tell you. They need their clients, whether they're representing the injured worker or the employer, they need the cooperation of their clients to be successful. And my hope is that I can develop relationships with businesses so they don't have any future claims, but if they do, they have the right procedures in place that they're prepared for it.
It's so powerful, all of this that you just said, because it goes down to the fact of having process in your business of keeping your documents in file, keeping your payroll records, organized, keeping your procedures organized. So, I would assume, I don't have an administrative assistant, but in those businesses, right, maybe it's almost an afterthought. I need somebody that picks up the phone. No, you need an administrative assistant that can help you be prepared for when things like this happen, that has an organized system. But who's training these people? Right. What business owner is sitting down telling them, listen, this is the system we're using for our payroll documents, our disciplinary actions. Like it would be interesting to poll, right? Like 100 businesses and see what is their disciplinary procedure.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, I was telling you about them not documenting disciplinary procedures, but a common issue that I see that is also a little disheartening is somebody at work goes up to the owner or their supervisor and says, I felt a little twinge in my back when I was picking up that box. And the owner or the supervisor will say, well, are you doing okay? And they're like, yeah, I'll see how I'm doing. And nothing happens. And then 6 months later, a workers' comp claim is filed, and because of a back injury that occurred 6 months prior, and the owner has nothing about it. And I will tell businesses, if an employee comes up to you and tells you that they've injured themselves in the workplace, whether they say it's significant or not, whether they ask for medical care or not, you need to document your file. Right. You need to show that this was reported, because that was the reporting of a workplace accident. Now, nothing may come from it. Maybe the employee sleeps it off that night and feels totally okay and there are no problems. But you have to have the foresight to understand, well, maybe that becomes something more.
It's going to turn into something.
And so, again, process, procedures, protocols, knowing as soon as I hear that, all right, I'm going to put it in the file. Nothing may come of it, but in 6 months from now, if my insurance company calls me and says, why did you never tell us that your employee hurt their back at work? You don't have to have that conversation. Right. You can say, you know what, I have something
incurred
in my file.
But not reported, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
It's reported internally, not that everything needs to be turned into the carrier, right? It's a documenting system inside of your business where you can go back and say, okay, well, they've never said that to us before, or they have.
And taking this conversation sort of back full circle, you as the employer can go up to that employee the next day and say, how you feeling?
Right.
Show that you care.
Right.
And if they're saying, oh, I'm feeling much better, document your file.
Correct.
Because then in 6 months from now, when that person says, oh, it's been debilitating for the last 6 months, you now have a document in your file where you followed up with that employee for maybe a week or two. And during that week or two, they said, no, I'm totally better. I have no problems.
It's a very hard song and dance to do, right? Where you want to show the human care, but you also need to document your files and follow protocol and procedures. It takes a skilled person to be able to communicate with an employee. I do care, but I also need to document. Right. That's a gift.
And that's effective communication, right? Being able to have that conversation with an employee where you're letting the employee know, I care about your well-being, but I'm also protecting my business. And I can do both at the same time. Right. I can care about you and care about my business. The two are not mutually exclusive.
Correct.
But it's a skill, and it's something that you as an employer can be trained on. And with the right people around you, with the right professionals around you who deal with these issues day in and day out, they can help you develop that skill and help you with those communications with your employees.
It's so powerful. And I know I've said that already a couple times, but it really is. And this is the stuff that kind of like gets me excited, because I feel like it's just nobody is taking the time. The majority of business owners aren't going to school and getting a business degree. They do it because they have a passion. And who else is going to teach them if not us?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is, I think it's our duty and our obligation as professionals within our industries to do that. And I have found it very rewarding to sit there in front of clients, both the insurance carriers and the employers, and providing them that educational aspect of what I do. It really makes them so much more prepared to deal with those issues as they face it. And when I see the end result, when I see that they are prepared, when I see that they have handled those issues well, it's very rewarding. Yeah. It makes me feel like, okay, this is what I'm in it for.
Absolutely.
And it also strengthens those relationships with those clients, because now they say, oh, yeah, you know what? I remember talking to Robert about that, and that worked out. You
Right.
know? And
He was right. He guided me right.
He was right. It happens.
No, it's your wife may not think so, right? No, that's I think that's I love that. I love that so much because if people aren't doing this, if there's not professions to offer a helping hand to these people that just have a dream of owning a business, where would our community be? Right. It's our responsibility it's everything that we're doing has a direct impact in our local community, because if we do our jobs properly and we do it with care, then more people in our communities have jobs, safe jobs, right? Where you get to go home in one piece, right? That's the goal of every manufacturing place, HVAC, contractor, roofer. The goal should be everyone that comes to work goes home in one piece, safe.
And what's often forgotten about workers' compensation, the statute was created to efficiently get injured workers back to work. And I laugh sometimes because I think that gets lost in what is a very litigious society that we're in now, that when people get hurt at work, they think that's the end.
Right.
And the idea
the golden
is,
ticket.
Right. And the idea is, no, let's get you to a doctor as soon as possible. Let's get that condition treated. Let's get you back to as good as you're going to be able to get, and let's get you back to work. It is in the best interest of the injured worker to get back to work, to provide for them and their family. It's in the best interest of the employer to get that employee back to work, because that's going to help them be more efficient. If they lose an employee, I mean, we all know what turnover does to businesses. Having to find new employees, train new employees, and then you don't know if that new employee is going to work out. If you have a known entity with your current employee and they're good, you have a vested interest in getting them better as soon as possible and bringing them back to work. And that's what the system is about.
And there's also so much cost that is unknown to an employer that you cannot put a line item on your balance sheet about what this cost is. But think about the employee morale of all the other employees, they are watching how you handle that claim.
Absolutely.
Do you care? Or are you just forcing them to come back to work because you need somebody out on the field? Or, the employee morale, you can't even quantify what that does to everyone else. What about the fact that, what if this person's getting great, being home on the couch, watching TV all day, and they're talking to their work friends and they're just like, dude, this is a great life. Do it.
There are studies that show that the longer somebody is out of work, the less likely they are to ever return. And so that's part of, again, without getting too far into the weeds, it's one of the things that I talk to my clients about all the time is have a return to work program. Yep. Have a path for these injured workers to come back to work, even if it's in a light duty capacity, because the longer you keep them out of your workplace, the harder it is to bring them back. Mm-hmm. The other thing is they start feeling like they have less value, these employees. If they're sitting at home on their couch all day watching TV, they start losing their sense of value. Mm-hmm. And to the other point you were making, if they're having a bad experience in the workers' comp system, they're going to start talking to their friends, their relatives, their coworkers. And that's not something that you want permeating your workplace.
Right.
You want that person to go back to their coworkers and say, you know what, I'm being treated fairly in this process. And this is a very important point, because there are limitations on what you get in the workers' compensation system, and that is often a source of frustration for injured workers. In order to avoid the anger and frustration that those injured workers have, you need to constantly be in communication with them. And once they're represented by an attorney, I can't speak to that injured worker anymore. But I can speak to that attorney, and I can have that attorney relay the message back to the injured worker. And one of the most important parts of my job is significant, consistent communication with my opposing attorney, the attorney that's representing the injured worker. I want that attorney to know that we're working on this claim. Right. We're doing everything we can to get their client the treatment they need, the lost wages they need. And if we have denied a certain benefit for any reason, that there's a reason for it, that we have a legal justification for it. Because even though that injured worker might be upset that a certain benefit was denied, they at least understand that we had a basis for that.
Right.
And sometimes the litigation process is not fair and it's not fast, but by providing that explanation and by providing that constant communication as to what's going on, I was just recently dealing with an IT issue, and IT issues can be very frustrating.
They're so annoying.
If your system is down and you can't do certain things you need to do, it's very frustrating. And the IT people were in constant communication with us. This is what we're doing. This is what the fix is. And so as frustrated as we were that we didn't have access to the certain IT that we needed, it was at least a little comforting to know this is what's being worked
forgotten.
on. Right. And this is why this issue has occurred. This is the same concept I apply to the injured workers is we might not always be making decisions as employers and insurance companies that you like. You might want things faster. You might want certain things that you're not getting right now. We understand that you're upset and frustrated by that. My job is to make sure you understand why these decisions are being made, that they're not frivolous decisions. Right. They're not decisions that we're making without any support or basis for it. I will always provide you that. And that does have an effect on the injured worker. They start saying, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Employer, I'm not happy with this decision you're making, but I get it.
Right.
I understand it. And it brings down the temperature a little bit. The legal profession and the insurance industry can be very adversarial, very confrontational industries. And so I view my role as somebody who is constantly trying to bring that temperature down, making it less confrontational, less adversarial, more of a cooperative effort to get through the process without all that fighting. Because issues get resolved, claims get settled, injured workers tend to be happier when it is not adversarial and not confrontational. And there's a way to navigate that process without it being that way.
So what do you tell someone? I'm glad you brought up return to work. I wasn't going to bring it up, but I'm glad you did because, that's part of what we do, right? If you have a mod above a 1, you obviously have some issues. You don't have an insurance issue. You have a risk management issue. So we always try to come in with the first thing. Do you have a return to work program? We were sitting in front of a pretty large electrical company here locally, and their mod 3 years in a row, increasing. Okay. So we have the meeting. We're sitting there with the insured or with the prospect, and we ask them, do you have a return to work program? And she says, oh, please, never. Why would I do? I don't want those guys in the office anyway. Right. Why would I bring them in here? What are they going to do? Count paper clips? And it was the first time we had ever heard that adamantly too. Like sometimes people will be like, no, we don't. We've been meaning to have one. We don't have one. Great. We can help you do that. Right. But she was just like, absolutely not, where they would just be in the way. How do we change that mindset?
So I understand. Let me start off by saying I understand that mindset. I have plenty of cases where the employer has a return to work program. They bring the employee back to work and they re-injure themselves. Or they exacerbate or aggravate the injury that they had from their prior work accident. Employers look at these injured workers as ongoing liabilities, and they don't want to bring an ongoing liability back into the workplace. And I get it. But from a workers' compensation standpoint, that is not a good strategy. You can, without sounding like a broken record, you can institute procedures to bring people back in a safe manner where they can be closely monitored, engaging in activities that are not going to put them at a risk of injuring themselves. Pushing employees to come back to work is very important, and having a solid return to work program is very important. A lot of that is communication with the insurance folks and conversations with the attorneys about looking at their industry, looking at their business, and working together with them to figure out what kinds of return to work opportunities there are. Let's take a look at the different types of light duty restrictions that an injured worker may have: lifting, pushing, pulling, climbing. And let's see what types of jobs. The best employers that I've worked with over the years, they have a formal written return to work policy that gives job descriptions depending on the different limitations that employees have. So there is an expectation from the very beginning. If your doctor puts you back on light duty with these restrictions, here are the different jobs that you're going to have. And we expect you to come back to work as soon as these restrictions are put into place. and you're going to work your normal work schedule. You're going to get your normal pay. You're not going to have a reduction in earnings.
Right.
And you are going to continue to be a valuable part of this business. Now, I understand the reality of it is that some employees aren't motivated to come back to work. And some employees get upset when they feel like they're being forced.
They're being pressured. Right. They're pressured.
And they can create issues in the workplace. It is why it's going to be important, especially if you have concerns about a particular employee, that you are closely monitoring their action. Don't have that employee working in some corner of the warehouse by themselves where they can claim they got injured, but nobody could see whether they got injured. You want to put that employee around a lot of people. You want those people to see if they're adhering to the work restrictions. And if that employee claims that they re-injured themselves, you want other witnesses around who can say, no, I was watching that person all day. Nothing ever happened. You can put safeguards in place, even with the employees that you think might be problematic. But the alternative is you don't bring them back to work, and now the insurance company is having to pay out indemnity lost wage benefits, and the value of the claim starts to go up. Or you as an employer decide that you want to terminate this person. Not only does that open you up to exposure to some potential employment issues like wrongful termination and retaliatory discharge, but again, unless it's for misconduct, which is a legal term and it's very hard to prove misconduct, that employee, even though they've been terminated, is still going to be entitled to lost wage benefits. Again, the value of the claim is going to go up. And now you have to put your employment attorney on notice that there might be an issue there. I think one of the most important conversations that you as a business owner should be having with your insurance folks and with your attorney is about return to work. It is such an integral part of the post-accident process. And that there needs to be that constant communication with the insurance company, with your attorney, with the doctors to understand how can you bring that employee back to work safely. That is always the goal, is to bring that employee back to work safely. But I don't think I've come across any job, including those in the construction industry, where you can't offer some type of light duty work. And it's not, I laugh when you talk about counting paper clips, because that's always the classic example of workers' comp. We're just going to sit them at a table and counting paper clips. That's not how you want to bring an employee back to work. There has to be an essential function of your job that doesn't require significant physical activity. And let's put that person, it might be filing.
Right.
I don't know if people have file cabinets
Scanning,
anymore.
Picking up the phone, setting appointments. There's so much. There's so much. It all ties into what we've been talking about. It's the culture. It's the education. It's expectation, communication with your employees, letting them know, putting it in a hiring packet, right? This is if you ever did get injured, this is how workers' comp works. We have it. You can use it. You're not going to lose your job if you get injured. Right. That's sometimes why these claims last longer. They're afraid they're going to lose their job.
I have heard that so many times from injured workers during depositions. I would say, why didn't you report this to your employer? And they say, I thought they were going to fire me. Yep. And while on one hand, my instinct is always to blame the employee and saying, listen, common sense, you should. But the reality is that the employers, it's a communication issue again. The employers should be letting these employees know, if you get hurt at work, don't fear that you're going to be terminated. You need to let us know so we can take care of you. If you have an injured worker who continues to work for you that you don't know about, they could suffer a much more serious injury the longer that goes on, or they could actually put other employees in danger. Yep. Because imagine if you're working in a warehouse and you're working with forklifts and you're trying to do your job while you're hurt, you could hurt somebody else around you. So as an employer, that communication with employees about those types of issues is very important. Very important.
And we haven't even gotten to the fact that you could, to have a doctor that you send your employees to regularly. We, in our industry and the conferences and all that stuff that we go to, and the education piece about the impact of what has impact on these workers' comp claims. Like you said, obviously staying at home, as soon as they're on that couch, your claim increases the cost, which then increases your mod, which then increases your rate. But even the fact of having really good doctors, not the pill prescribing doctors, right? Having a triage, having doctors that know the value of preserving an employee's, confidence, integrity, not, like you said, where they start to feel devalued, like they don't even need me. It probably turns into even like a self-esteem issue, right? They don't want to go back. All of that combined. But I mean, all of these things are stuff outside of being addicted to pain pills.
Right.
That is a whole other thing that can not just, obviously we're talking about workers' comp, increase your costs, but really ruin someone's life.
Well, we talked about value, and not all doctors understand how workers' comp works. And not all doctors understand what they're facing when an injured worker comes into their office. That you can't treat an injured worker like any other patient. There's all sorts of other issues that come into play. The value of me having relationships with these doctors, because I have worked with these doctors for 20 years, so I can call up the doctor and explain to the doctor, this is who's walking into your office, or after the patient goes in, and I get a medical report, me being able to call up the doctor and say, okay, I've just read your report. Can you explain a few things to me so I understand what your mindset is on this? And having relationships, working with these doctors over the years, that is so valuable to the clients, because I can call up an employer and say, yeah, this employee has these work restrictions now. Do you understand what these work restrictions are? And the employer says, well, nah, I don't really get like what I can provide. And I'll say to the employer, tell me what types of jobs you have. Tell me the physical requirements of the job. And I go back to the doctors.
Right.
And I'll say to the doctors, all right, I just spoke to my client. This is the job that they have available. Does this fall within the work restrictions?
Can they do this?
Yes. And the doctors will say, yeah, that's exactly. Or, no, this aspect of the job I don't think they really can do, but this aspect. But having that, almost being the liaison between the employer and the doctor, and being able to get the employer the information they need from the doctor that they can best accommodate those work restrictions is invaluable. But you need to have those relationships with the doctors where you can call up the doctor and have a candid conversation with the doctor. That doctor feels a sense of comfort with you because you've conferenced with them for so many years. That's the value, right? That's where the employer can say, okay, you know what? I'm going to be able to get an answer to this pretty quickly. And I have the peace of mind that when I bring this employee back, I know that the work that I'm providing them is totally meeting what the doctor intended.
Right. This stuff is so powerful because it just comes back to the same thing. It's even that piece of having, if they have these physical, incapacities because of their injury, these are the jobs that they should be able to do. Well, where is that described? Right. If you don't do that up front. That's why it's like these claims, when an employer is unprepared, can just snowball into these catastrophic financial losses. Sure, for an insurance carrier, but ultimately it gets passed on to you and your rates.
For sure.
And that's why your mod goes up. But these things, the preparation, the power of being prepared, and obviously you're never going to be 100% prepared, right? But having really clear, concise job descriptions where you're not scrambling to do this at the time of that claim, making sure that, because I'm pretty sure I know this, but in the state of Florida, an employer can choose a doctor to send their injured employee to.
Yeah, under Florida workers' compensation law, the insurance company selects the treating doctor.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the employer, or the employee can choose a second opinion if they want it, if they did not feel comfortable.
Yeah, so in Florida, there's something called a one-time change. So if the injured worker is unhappy with the first doctor or just wants another opinion, they get one-time change, and they can get another doctor. And then if they still want another opinion, they're allowed to get what's called an independent medical examiner, which is a doctor that they would retain on their own for another opinion. But in terms of authorized treating doctors, they really have two opportunities: the initial treating doctor and a one-time change. But they're selected by the insurance company.
Okay. Yeah, that's why it's so powerful to have a relationship with you prior, because then you can send them to a doctor that you know is good, understands the workers' comp system, and everyone collectively has the same goal. It's bringing this person back to 100%.
Right. Being
able to come back to work, live a meaningful life, provide for their family, not get caught in the system of, couch surfing, right? Which happens. It happens more times than not.
And I think a part of this is the employer's understanding what their role is in this process. So an employer needs to get the medical records. The employer needs to know what the work restrictions are. And so insurance companies do the best they can to get those medical records out to the employers as soon as possible and communicate with the employers. But it doesn't always happen in the time frame that's necessary. So an employer needs to know what their rights are in this process. And when a person gets injured at work, the employer should be thinking to themselves, okay, how is this person doing? Are they getting any better? But also, do they have work restrictions? And what are those work restrictions? And am I now in a position as an employer to bring them back to work? You don't know that until you get those medical records and see what work restrictions are in place. I have had many times that an employer will call me up and say, hey, Robert, do you have any update on what the work restrictions are? And I can help communicate with those employers and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to send you over the most recent records I have. Let me know, can you accommodate this? And if you have any questions about that, let's work together and figure out what you can do. Very often they'll ask me the question, do I have to bring them back to work? And we'll have that conversation as well. But you can't just ignore the employer. You can't, and I think with my brethren, my contemporaries, it's very often the insurance companies that are retaining us on behalf of their insureds. And so the primary communication is between us and the insurance companies, which is very important. But we can't forget about the employers in that process.
Right.
They are an integral part of that sort of circle of communication between the insurance company, myself, and the employer.
We can talk for hours about this.
I think we have.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good cutoff point. Thank you so much. This is such good information. And I know that you're passionate about making a difference and helping businesses, run a business, keep their doors open, be profitable, employ our community. And I love that. And I think that that's why we have such a good relationship. And I love to talk to you. I really enjoy talking to you. And you can tell that, it's a passion of yours. And I respect that. And I love that.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you today.
You're definitely coming back. You're on the return list.
Awesome. I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.